The 50 most famous works of art by Rembrandt. Number 50. The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Dageman. 1656. Painted in 1656, The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Dageman is one of Rembrandt's most striking and unconventional works within the subgenre of collective portraiture and medical genre painting. Made several years after the famous The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicolas Tulp, 1632, this painting, of which only a fragment survives today after a fire in the 18th century, depicts the moment when Dr. Jan Dageman and his colleagues carry out a public dissection, a common practice in Golden Age Holland as part of the activities of the Surgeons' Guild. In the original work, Dr. Dageman appears accompanied by other surgeons, leaning over the body of a corpse, carefully analyzing the brain of the deceased. The light, with a soft and diffuse quality, is concentrated in the area of the dissection, contrasting with the penumbra that envelops the rest of the figures. Rembrandt's brushstrokes, loose and impasto, and his use of chiaroscuro give the scene a dramatic, almost theatrical realism, highlighting the raw and human character of the anatomical practice. Unlike other compositions of a more solemn and orderly nature, here Rembrandt immerses himself fully in the moment of clinical study, almost as if the spectator were bursting into the middle of the dissection. The expressions of the surgeons, serious, concentrated, oblivious to pomp, suggest the everyday nature of scientific practice and the rational curiosity that drove the medical advances of the time. The importance of this work lies both in its courage in addressing such a raw subject and in the painter's ability to transcend mere medical illustration and reach a philosophical dimension. Number 49. Esther's Feast. 1660. Esther's Feast captures one of the most dramatic passages in the Old Testament, the moment when Queen Esther, risking her own life, reveals to King Ahasuerus the conspiracy hatched by Haman to exterminate the Jewish people. Painted around 1660, the work shows Rembrandt immersing himself in the biblical narrative with an unmatched talent for emotional realism, the handling of light and scenic composition. The scene takes place in an intimate space, a royal banquet, richly decorated with fabrics, metal tableware, and luxurious details. Despite the splendor, the dramatic focus falls on the expressions of the characters. Esther appears with a firm but restrained gaze, aware of the danger that her revelation implies. King Ahasuerus, surprised and indignant, appears ready to make a drastic decision, while Haman, pale and terrified, understands that his plan has been exposed. Rembrandt employs an enveloping chiaroscuro, precisely illuminating the faces and leaving much of the surroundings in shadow. This technique heightens the psychological tension, as the light acts as a focus of the action, directing attention to the moral drama unfolding before us. The artist, influenced by both the Dutch painting tradition and his contact with Italian sources, achieves a balance between narrative intensity and the psychological depth of the characters. This painting is not only an illustration of the biblical text, but a reflection on justice, courage, and responsibility in the face of power. Throughout history, this work has been appreciated for its ability to emotionally involve the viewer, transporting them into the inner world of the protagonists. Esther's Feast is a clear example of Rembrandt's technical virtuosity and his ability to make past and present, myth and reality, dialogue on a canvas that transcends time. Number 48. The Farewell of David and Jonathan. 1642. The biblical story of the deep friendship between David and Jonathan, told in the Book of Samuel, serves as inspiration for this work painted around 1642. In it, Rembrandt captures the moving moment of separation, when both young men realize that the danger and intrigues at King Saul's court will make their reunion impossible. The painter turns the canvas into an intimate setting in which the gesture of the embrace becomes a universal symbol of loyalty, sacrifice, and anticipated pain. The painting stands out for the way Rembrandt distributes light and shadow, creating an atmosphere charged with emotion. The lighting focuses on the faces and intertwined hands of the two friends, while the rest of the environment is immersed in a soft penumbra. This choice not only isolates the main scene from distractions, but also reinforces the introspective nature of the moment. The expressiveness of the faces, captured with meticulous strokes and remarkable realism, conveys to the viewer the human dimension of the biblical story. The coloring is moderate, with warm tones in the flesh and clothing, reinforcing the intimacy and emotional closeness between the characters. This chromatic subtlety is combined with the artist's ability to materialize the latent tension in the air, the threat that weighs on David, the loss that Jonathan senses, the resignation in the face of an uncertain destiny. The work is not a mere illustration, but an emotional vehicle that communicates ethical and universal values. This painting has been praised for centuries for its humanity, its simplicity, and its psychological depth, traits that have consecrated Rembrandt as an incomparable master of the portrait of the soul. Number 47. Minerva in Her Study, 1635. In Minerva in Her Study, painted around 1635, Rembrandt addresses the theme of the Roman goddess of wisdom, military strategy, and the arts, depicting her in a serene, cultured setting. Minerva is surrounded by books, maps, scientific instruments, and items that symbolize accumulated knowledge. Her figure is majestic but thoughtful, with a serene face that suggests introspection and intellectual mastery. The painting combines the Renaissance tradition of depicting classical deities with the Dutch Baroque sensitivity to light and realism. Rembrandt moves away from exaggerated idealization. The goddess here has human features, a certain warmth in her countenance, and clothing that, while rich, does not completely distance her from humanity. Natural light, coming from an invisible window, falls on the objects and her armor, enhancing the contrast between the metallic surfaces and the soft textures of the fabrics. The chiaroscuro underlines the intimate character of the scene, as if we were witnessing the goddess in a moment of calm and reflection. This artistic treatment of the mythological figure is not capricious. In the 17th century, Amsterdam was a cultural hub in ferment, and the representation of Minerva could be interpreted as a tribute to knowledge, religious tolerance, and the flourishing of the arts and sciences in the Dutch Republic. The work suggests that wisdom is not a distant gift, but an ideal attainable through study, effort, and reflection. Over time, Minerva in Her Study has been recognized not only for its aesthetic and technical value, but for its ability to evoke the intellectual spirit of an era that treasured knowledge as a beacon of progress and humanity. Number 46. Christ Healing the Sick, 1649. Popularly known as the 100 Florin sheet, this work is not a painting, but a celebrated etching engraved by Rembrandt around 1649. It is considered one of the artist's greatest achievements in the field of engraving, a medium in which he explored his genius with the same passion and innovation as in oil painting. The scene shows Christ surrounded by a crowd of sick, disabled, and needy people seeking relief for their physical and spiritual ailments. The composition is complex and balanced. The central figure of Christ is perceived as a focus of light and hope amidst the gloom that envelops those present. Rembrandt achieved, through the exquisite handling of etching, a rich tonal gradation that goes from deep blacks to delicate grays, creating an atmosphere that is both realistic and spiritual. The precisely drawn facial expressions project the anguish, faith, and expectation of an audience desperate for salvation. This print transcends mere biblical description. It is a study of compassion, empathy, and the human capacity for redemption. The viewer cannot help but be moved by the sincerity of the emotions reflected in the figures. Furthermore, the work is a testament to Rembrandt's technical virtuosity, who manipulated the metal plates, ink, and paper with a skill that is hardly comparable in his time. Its fame among collectors and art historians has made the 100-florin sheet an essential piece for understanding the spiritual, technical, and artistic dimension of the Dutch master. Number 45. The Holy Family with Angels. 1645. In The Holy Family with Angels, painted around 1645, Rembrandt presents Mary, Joseph, and the child Jesus in a humble, almost everyday domestic setting. This choice moves the scene away from the usual grandiloquence of religious iconography and closer to human experience, underlining the humanity of the Holy Family. Around them, almost imperceptible angels peek out delicately, as if they were part of the luminous atmosphere that fills the scene. The soft, diffuse lighting seems to emanate both from the divine presence and from the natural light entering through a nearby window. This fusion of the sacred with the earthly is one of the most notable features of the painting. There are no theatrical gestures or dazzling halos, but a serene communion between the divine and the human. The loose brushstrokes, characteristic of Rembrandt's mature period, add texture, warmth, and depth, allowing the viewer to feel the intimacy of the moment. The work was conceived at a time when religious beliefs were strongly rooted in Dutch society, despite the confessional heterogeneity. Rembrandt, aware of the spiritual tensions and sensibilities of his audience, opts here for a vision that invites quiet contemplation without falling into Baroque pomp. The result is a scene that, although sacred, retains such a human immediacy and sincerity that the modern viewer can still empathize with it. Today, this painting is acclaimed for its ability to bridge the gap between religious experience and everyday life, reminding us that spirituality can dwell in small family scenes. Number 44. Self-Portrait with a Walking Stick, 1658. The Self-Portrait with a Walking Stick from 1658 is one of the most remarkable pictorial introspections Rembrandt made in his later life. Here he is not presented as a powerful man or at the height of fame, but as someone who has lived, who has lost, and who has learned to cope with the passage of time. The figure, standing with a walking stick in his hand, radiates a melancholic dignity. The walking stick, in addition to being a physical support, can be interpreted as a symbol of wisdom acquired along the way. The loose, impasto-rich painting technique, with touches of light and color applied almost sculpturally, lends a tactile presence to the work, ability to use painting as a mirror of the soul. The viewer feels that they are facing a real human being, not an idealized image. Through its honesty, the work becomes a testament to human fragility and resilience. It is a meditation on identity, time, and artistic vocation. Its impact has not diminished over the centuries. It remains a poignant reminder of the greatness of art as a vehicle for understanding the human experience in all its complexity. Number 43. The Circumcision, 1661. The Circumcision recreates a passage from the New Testament that is usually depicted with great pomp, but in the hands of Rembrandt it becomes a deeply human and intimate scene. Painted around 1661, this work captures the moment when the child Jesus, in accordance with Jewish traditions, is presented in the temple to be circumcised. Far from pomp, Rembrandt opts for a calm atmosphere, with a few figures focused on the sacred act. The light, carefully directed, illuminates the protagonists without flooding the rest of the room. This choice underlines the sacred character of the scene and at the same time its recollection. In the faces, a mixture of solemnity, tenderness, and serene acceptance can be perceived. The brushstrokes, more restrained and precise, adapt to the intimacy of the subject, avoiding any decorative excess. The use of dark tones in the background creates a contrast with the illuminated areas, reinforcing the idea of a spiritual and contained moment. This minimalist and close representation of a key rite in the life of Jesus contains a powerful message. Divinity is discovered in everyday gestures and simple rituals. Rembrandt underlines the humanity of the scene, reminding the viewer that even the most sacred biblical episodes can evoke emotions as human as empathy, modesty, and hope. This painting has been praised for its ability to convey profound theological content without resorting to lavish staging, placing faith at the heart of ordinary life. Number 42. The Polish Nobleman, 1637. Also known as The Man in the Oriental Cap, The Polish Nobleman, 1637, is an enigmatic portrait that continues to generate debates about the identity and origin of the character depicted. Some historians have suggested that it is a Polish nobleman. Others point to an Oriental merchant, while others consider that it could be a model dressed in exotic clothing, reflecting the fascination with distant lands that was experienced in 17th century Europe. Rembrandt, an expert in capturing the psychological essence of his subjects, shows the character with a dignified bearing, his head slightly tilted and a look that suggests contemplation. The attire, with a fur cap and luxurious clothing, reveals a high social status, or, at least, the intention to appear so. The loose brushstrokes create a tactile texture on the fabrics and face, bringing the image to life with a realism that does not exclude mystery. The light modulates the features, generating soft chiaroscuros that provide depth and volume. This portrait is also a window into the cosmopolitan curiosity of Amsterdam at the time, a vibrant commercial center where merchants, diplomats, and travelers from different parts of the world met. The Polish nobleman embodies the taste for cultural diversity and the symbolic richness of foreign clothing. The absence of conclusive information about the model adds a literary component to the work. It is a face that invites us to imagine travel stories, political intrigues, and enriching cultural exchanges. Number 41. The Sacrifice of Isaac, 1635. The Sacrifice of Isaac, painted around 1635, is one of the most intense and dramatic interpretations of the biblical story of Genesis, in which Abraham, by divine command, prepares to sacrifice his beloved son Isaac before being stopped by an angel. Rembrandt chooses the crucial moment, full of tension and emotion. Abraham holds on tightly to Isaac, who struggles in fear, while the angel, with a firm gesture, stops the knife that would end the boy's life. The composition, full of dynamism, places the figures in the foreground, forcing the viewer to confront the drama directly. The golden light, which falls on the faces and hands, highlights the tense features and the tense muscles. The contrast between the contained brutality of the act and the divine intervention creates an atmosphere charged with moral and spiritual meaning. Rembrandt makes visible Abraham's internal conflict, paternal love, obedience to God, and terror at loss. Here, the Dutch painter explores the nature of sacrifice, faith, trust, and morality. Instead of opting for a balanced and distant composition, he introduces the viewer into the scene, making him a participant in the moral dilemma. For this reason, this painting continues to impact those who contemplate it centuries later, reminding them that the great religious stories not only speak of the divine, but also of the complexity and contradictions of the human heart. The Sacrifice of Isaac, attests to Rembrandt's ability to transform biblical episodes into universal, timeless narratives that transcend their historical context to engage with the human conscience. Number 40. Portrait of Hendrickje Stoffels, 1654. Painted around 1654, the Portrait of Hendrickje Stoffels is an eloquent example of the way in which Rembrandt knew how to capture the human essence through his brushes. Hendrickje Stoffels, who was the painter's partner and muse in his later years, is depicted with a naturalness and closeness that goes beyond a mere physical portrait. At that time, Hendrickje, a former domestic servant in the painter's house, had become his partner after the death of Saskia van Eilenberg, Rembrandt's first wife. The artist, marked by economic and personal difficulties, found in Hendrickje a vital support, a reflection of intimacy and affection that is reflected in the work. The chromatic palette, warm and with earthy tones, envelops Hendrickje in a serene and contemplative atmosphere. Rembrandt, faithful to his late style, uses loose, impasto brushstrokes, accentuating textures and lighting effects that give volume to her face and clothing. The soft, golden light falls on the sitter's cheeks, capturing the softness of her skin and the depth of her gaze. There is a mixture of serenity, confidence, and a touch of melancholy in her expression, traits that reflect the intimacy of the relationship between model and painter. The portrait also involves a dialogue with the social conventions of the period. Despite not being married, Hendrickje's presence in Rembrandt's life was harshly judged by the Calvinist community. However, the artist is not intimidated by social pressures and paints his companion with the same dignity and nobility with which he would depict a legitimate wife or a member of the upper bourgeoisie. This act speaks of the painter's inner freedom, of his desire to capture the truth of his existence beyond the norms imposed by society. Over time, the Portrait of Hendrickje Stoffels has been interpreted as an expression of love, respect, and mutual understanding. More than a commercial commission, this painting is a window into Rembrandt's most personal dimension, a silent testimony of the people he loved and who marked his art with the deep imprint of their shared life. Number 39. The Resurrection, 1639. The Resurrection, painted around 1639, is one of Rembrandt's most intense and dramatic interpretations of Christian themes. In this work, the artist addresses one of the high points of the New Testament, the moment when Christ emerges from the tomb, triumphing over death and renewing the hope of humanity. Far from depicting it with the theatrical pomp of other Baroque painters, Rembrandt focuses on the emotion, astonishment, and awe surrounding the event. The scene, probably conceived as an etching or preparatory drawing before being developed on various supports, shows an exceptional mastery of chiaroscuro. The light, which emanates directly from the resurrected figure of Christ, dispels the surrounding darkness and reveals the stupor of the human figures. The soldiers, guardians of the tomb, fall backwards with expressions of shock and terror, while the women, or indirect witnesses of the scene, hardly dare to believe what they see. This contrast between divine light and earthly darkness gives the composition a spiritual energy that goes beyond the narrative anecdote. On a stylistic level, Rembrandt experiments with subtle gradations of light and shadow, creating a vibrant and dynamic atmosphere. His strokes, whether in etching or brush, give movement to the fabrics, the soldiers' weapons, and the stone surroundings of the tomb. Every wrinkle, every fold, seems to come to life under the influence of the light radiated by the Savior. Thematically, the resurrection is not only a literal representation of the Christian miracle, but a reflection on the victory of good over evil, of life over death. The painter invites the viewer to contemplate the supernatural with human eyes, capturing stupor, fear, and hope. Thus, The work not only narrates a biblical event, but channels the emotional experience of those who witness an event that escapes earthly logic. Number 38. Woman Bathing in a Brook, 1654. Woman Bathing in a Brook, painted in 1654, is one of the most celebrated and exquisite works of Rembrandt's mature phase, notable for its unusual intimacy and profound humanity. Instead of a narrative or biblical scene, the painter opts for an everyday and private motif. A woman, often identified as Hendrikia Stoffels, walks into a stream to wash herself, leaning slightly while lifting her skirts so as not to get it wet. Unlike many works of idealized nudes in the European tradition, this scene shows authentic beauty, without artifice. The female figure is not a goddess, a nymph, or a Venus, but a real woman, with human forms, with the delicate imperfection of the flesh. Rembrandt, through his loose and nuanced brushstrokes, captures the warmth of the skin, the smoothness of the flesh, and the soft reflection of the water. The dim light filters through the vegetation and caresses the woman's body, highlighting curves and volumes with an almost palpable intimacy. The surroundings, barely suggested, do not distract attention from the simple and everyday act of bathing. More than a landscape, the setting is a haven of serenity, an intimate space where the female figure relates to nature in a gesture of purity and calm. There are no luxurious ornaments, nor mythological elements that justify the scene, only the dignity of the human figure in a moment of solitude. This radical simplicity represents a key point in the evolution of Rembrandt's art. The work does not seek to impress with thematic complexity or exalt an ideal of unattainable beauty. Its power lies in honesty, in the celebration of the human presence beyond stereotypes or heroic narratives. Over time, this painting has been considered a silent manifesto of the artist's compassionate gaze, of his ability to dignify any moment of everyday life and to find, in the apparently banal, the essence of human existence. Number 37. Self-Portrait as the Apostle Paul, 1661. In Self-Portrait as the Apostle Paul, painted in 1661, Rembrandt combines the genre of the self-portrait with the representation of a biblical character, creating a surprising image full of symbolism. Representing himself as the Apostle Paul, a key figure in early Christianity and author of numerous epistles, was not a gratuitous gesture. The painter, in his maturity, sees himself reflected in the saint who experienced conversion, suffering, doubt, and perseverance in faith. The canvas shows a gray-haired Rembrandt, with wrinkles typical of age, dressed in sober clothing and wearing an Oriental-style turban or cap. In his right hand he holds a pen, while his left hand rests on a thick tome that refers to the scriptures. The lighting, concentrated on the face and hands, creates a strong contrast that enhances the psychological intensity of the portrait. The gaze is thoughtful, deep, with a hint of resignation and serenity that connects the artist with the apostolic figure, known for his firm temper in the face of adversity. On a symbolic level, the Apostle Paul embodies the idea of spiritual transformation. Rembrandt, in the last years of his life, had suffered bankruptcy, family losses, and the deterioration of his artistic reputation. In this context, assuming oneself as Paul means recognizing the value of learning through pain, the importance of faith, not necessarily confessional, but faith in art, in life, and the need to persist in the search for a deeper truth. The pen suggests the writing of letters and messages to the world, but also the metaphor of a painter who leaves his testimony on canvas and oil. The self-portrait as Paul is therefore an introspective manifesto. The artist sees himself as a wise man who, after a long journey of ups and downs, has reached a more mature understanding of his mission. Today, This work is valued not only for its technical and aesthetic value, but for the honesty with which Rembrandt reveals himself to the viewer, disguised as a saint with whom he shares the desire to transcend human limitations through knowledge, perseverance, and faith in the power of expression. Number 36. Portrait of Agatha Baugh, 1641. The Portrait of Agatha Baugh, painted around 1641, is one of Rembrandt's finest works in the portrait genre. Agatha Baugh, daughter of a prominent merchant and official of the Dutch East India Company, embodies the prosperous and cultured bourgeoisie of 17th-century Amsterdam. In this portrait, the artist combines meticulous detail with his characteristic play of light and shadow to give the figure an almost tangible presence. Agatha is shown seated, richly dressed in a dark satin and lace dress, next to a fan that she elegantly holds. The dress, jewelry, and accessories reflect the social status of the subject, whose family enjoyed high economic and cultural prestige. However, Rembrandt does not limit himself to displaying material luxury. In her serene face and carefully outlined hands, we can guess the intelligence, dignity, and inner control that characterized the women of the Dutch upper bourgeoisie. The light caresses her cheeks and highlights the contrast between the textures of the fabrics, the transparency of the lace, and the metallic shine of the jewels. An interesting detail is the subtle gesture of the character holding the fan, an attribute of distinction that also serves to show the painter's skill in the representation of diverse materials. The dark background, barely suggested, concentrates all attention on the figure, thus highlighting the individuality and character of Agatha Baugh. During the Dutch Golden Age, the demand for portraits among the wealthy class was very high. However, Rembrandt's works stood out for their deep psychology and their ability to transcend mere external appearance. In the case of Agatha Baugh, the result is a portrait where material opulence is balanced with the humanity of the sitter, presenting her as a figure who, beyond her wealth, radiates a calm self-assurance. Number 35. Portrait of Nicolaes Ruts, 1631. The Portrait of Nicolaes Ruts, dated 1631, marks an early turning point in Rembrandt's career. Executed at the age of 25, when the artist was in Amsterdam taking his first steps towards recognition, this commission demonstrates the ability of a young painter to compete with the established portrait painters of the time. Nicolaes Ruts, a prosperous fur trader, appears here with a dignity and presence that anticipate Rembrandt's later genius in the field of portraiture. The figure is shown half-length, wrapped in dark furs that speak of his profession and his well-off condition. Ruts looks directly at the viewer, his face framed by a well-groomed beard and elegant mustache. The skillfully arranged light illuminates the face and hands, leaving the background in a shadow that enhances the three-dimensionality of the figure. The technique of chiaroscuro, which the young Rembrandt had already mastered, makes the subject emerge from the darkness with an almost sculptural liveliness. Although the main aim of the portrait was to reflect Ruts' social position and economic success, Rembrandt goes further. The merchant appears not only as a wealthy man, but as a conscious, thoughtful individual with a steady and experienced gaze. The meticulous texture of the skin and the folds of the clothing reveal the painter's desire to capture reality faithfully, while the subtlety of the facial expression reveals a complex and well-rounded personality. This portrait, highly appreciated in its time, helped to cement Rembrandt's reputation as one of the best portrait painters in Amsterdam. His ability to fuse the depiction of psychological individuality with technical prowess set him apart from other painters, offering clients much more than just a flattering image. Over time, the Portrait of Nicolaes Ruts has gone down in history as an early example of Rembrandt's genius, a testament to his innate talent for revealing the human essence through the brush. Number 34. The Parable of the Rich Fool. 1627. The Parable of the Rich Fool, from 1627, is one of Rembrandt's earliest surviving works, painted when the young artist was barely 21 years old. Based on a passage from the Gospel of Luke, the scene tells the story of a wealthy man who accumulates riches without worrying about his eternal destiny, until God suddenly claims his life. The painting, therefore, combines a moralizing theme with Rembrandt's early exploration of chiaroscuro and pictorial narration. The composition shows the rich man in his study, surrounded by books, documents, coins, and other material symbols. The dim light of a candle illuminates his concentrated face as he greedily counts his possessions. This light contrast between the dim light and the fleeting flame amplifies the sense of transience that surrounds the scene. The objects glisten in the candlelight, but are shrouded in the surrounding darkness, suggesting that wealth is ephemeral in the face of imminent death. The brushwork at this stage is more restrained, the definition of the figures more precise than in the later works, and yet there are already traces of the style that would make Rembrandt famous: attention to detail, concentrated atmosphere, and the ability to convey psychological states. The rich fool is not a cartoonish villain here, but a human being caught up in his own greed, oblivious to the warnings of the gospel. Rembrandt approaches the religious passage without rigid moralism, but with the empathy of someone who understands human weaknesses. Over time, this small work has been valued as an indication of the painter's nascent genius. In addition to its theological dimension, it offers a look at 17th-century Dutch society, prosperous and oriented towards commerce, where moral questions about the use of wealth were latent. The Parable of the Rich Fool is an early gem in Rembrandt's oeuvre, a reminder that even in his youth, the artist could approach complex and universal themes with sensitivity and intelligence. Number 33. The Holy Family. 1634. The depiction of the Holy Family in 1634 is one of the many examples of Rembrandt's ability to humanize religious scenes, endowing them with a surprising warmth and proximity. Instead of showing the scene with divine splendor and spectacular angels, the artist opts for an intimate and everyday interpretation. Mary, Joseph, and the child Jesus appear in a humble home, surrounded by simple utensils and a homely atmosphere. Soft, golden light enters through a window, illuminating Mary as she tends to her son. The child, serene and confident on his mother's lap, is the spiritual center of the scene, radiating a subtle energy that gives the entire painting an aura of serenity. Joseph, to one side, is engaged in some manual task, representing the honest and constant work that sustains the family unit. There are no grandiloquent halos or grand mystical gestures, but rather a moment of domestic peace that, paradoxically, conveys more sacredness than many monumental compositions. Rembrandt's brushstrokes already show remarkable mastery in 1634. The textures, from the fabrics to the wood, are suggested with precise strokes and a subtle tonal gradation. Chiaroscuro, a central element in his style, gives depth and volume to the scene, while creating an enveloping atmosphere. The closed and intimate composition concentrates the viewer's gaze on the emotional bond between the characters. This humanized approach to the sacred theme responds to the religious sensibility of Protestant Amsterdam, where devotion was usually expressed with sobriety, without the decorative excess typical of Baroque Catholicism. Rembrandt, in turn, finds in everyday life a powerful vehicle for communicating spiritual values, demonstrating that holiness can dwell in the simplicity of daily life. Number 32. Christ presented to the people. 1655. The print known as Christ presented to the people, in Latin, Ecce Homo, is one of Rembrandt's most famous etchings, created around 1655. In this composition, the moment in which Pilate presents Christ, whipped and crowned with thorns, to the crowd is shown, offering to free him or condemn him. Unlike the idealized versions of other artists, Rembrandt turns this biblical scene into a penetrating human drama, where moral and spiritual tension is reflected in each of the characters. The sheet, executed in etching and dry point, reveals Rembrandt's technical virtuosity in etching. He masters subtle tonal gradations, light contrasts, and the detailed description of faces, clothing, and architecture. The complex and crowded composition shows Christ on a central balcony, exposed before a heterogeneous mass: Roman soldiers, priests, curious citizens, some with perplexed faces, others with gestures of indifference or restrained cruelty. Through chiaroscuro and spatial distribution, Rembrandt directs our gaze towards the central figure of Christ, who, with a serene and resigned countenance, contrasts with the agitation of the crowd. The artist conveys the internal tensions of the story: the struggle between justice and injustice, truth and lies, compassion and brutality. The architecture of the background, with its columns and arches, symbolically encloses the tragic destiny of the Savior within the structure of human power. Christ presented to the people is not simply a biblical illustration. It is a testament to Rembrandt's genius for translating emotions and spiritual dilemmas into a complex visual language. The work invites the viewer to get involved, to take a place among the crowd, and to reflect on his own stance in the face of innocent suffering. Number 31. The Adoration of the Shepherds. 1646. The Adoration of the Shepherds, executed around 1646, is a profound and sensitive interpretation of the birth of Jesus according to the Gospel story. Instead of showing a portal full of angels, with heavenly lights and epic gestures, Rembrandt opts for an intimate, dark, and reserved presentation, in which the dim light of a lamp or candle becomes the only beacon that reveals the sacred scene. The composition focuses on the baby Jesus, lying in a manger. Mary looks at him with tenderness and wonder, while Joseph, with humility, observes the arrival of the shepherds, who approach with respect and curiosity. On their faces, one can perceive the admiration for the mystery that unfolds before their eyes. The setting is humble. There are no luxuries, only the darkness of a silent night and the diffuse warmth of the light that caresses the faces and the hands joined in a gesture of reverence. The atmosphere is almost theatrical, but without the grandiloquence of a pompous set design. Rembrandt, master of chiaroscuro, uses this tool to concentrate the gaze on the essential: the child and the shepherds. The diffuse shadows envelop the scene, creating an intimacy that accentuates the miracle of the Incarnation as something close, familiar. Thus, the spectator feels part of this transcendent moment, not as a distant witness, but as someone who can feel the heat, the smell of straw, the contained breathing of the crowd gathered around the improvised crib. On a technical level, the brushstrokes are loose, rich in nuances, leaving small vibrations of light on the surfaces. Rembrandt does not seek idealized perfection, but emotional truth. This honesty makes the scene seem real, almost tangible, transcending the barriers of time to connect with the contemporary spectator. Number 30. The Stoning of St. Stephen. 1625. Painted around 1625, The Stoning of St. Stephen is one of Rembrandt's earliest known works, executed when the artist was only 19 years old and still in his hometown of Leiden. Based on a passage from the Acts of the Apostles, the scene shows the martyrdom of Stephen, the first Christian martyr, who was stoned by an angry mob. The composition, although of early workmanship, already reveals Rembrandt's intense interest in human drama and the ability to express complex emotional states. The light in this piece, although not yet reaching the mastery of the painter's mature chiaroscuro, suggests the embryo of his later style. Contrasts are used to underline the violence of the scene. Faces contorted by anger, clenched hands holding stones, Stephen's body on the verge of collapsing. Amid the brutality, the saint retains a stoic serenity, his gaze raised to heaven, indicating the spiritual dimension of the sacrifice. The brushwork is relatively light and detailed, typical of an artist in training who is assimilating the tradition of earlier masters. The atmosphere still lacks the density and texture that would be so characteristic of his maturity. Nevertheless, the painting is notable for the narrative intensity and emotional force, traits that would accompany Rembrandt throughout his career. The stoning of Saint Stephen provides a window into the workshop of the young Rembrandt, an artist who was already showing his inclination to humanize the sacred and to strip biblical scenes of empty rhetoric, to turn them into human and universal experiences. Number 29. Artemisia, 1634. Artemisia, painted in 1634, is one of the works in which Rembrandt addresses a historical and mythological subject with the emotional depth that characterizes his style. Although the identity of the depicted figure is a matter of debate, some historians identify her as Queen Artemisia, known for her devotion and mourning for her late husband Mausolus. The female figure becomes a symbol of restrained grief, loyal love, and unwavering memory. The woman holds a goblet, possibly containing the ashes of her beloved. According to legend, Artemisia drank a mixture of her husband's ashes as an act of extreme devotion, while her face reflects a complex mix of sadness, determination, and reverence. Rembrandt concentrates the light on her face and hands, creating a strong contrast with the dark background. This lighting enhances the psychological character of the portrait, giving it an almost theatrical dimension. The brushwork is freer than in earlier works, and the canvases boast rich textures and deep chromatic nuances. The painter does not limit himself to telling an ancient story, but uses the myth to explore universal emotions, loss, memory, and loyalty beyond death. Artemisia is a clear example of Rembrandt's ability to transcend the mere historical narrative and, instead, offer us a portrait of the human spirit facing the abyss of absence. Number 28. The Resurrection of Lazarus, 1632. The Resurrection of Lazarus, created around 1632, shows the moment when Christ orders Lazarus, dead for days, to leave his tomb. The composition presents a dark scene, with Lazarus' tomb as the central focus, from which the resurrected man rises with a stunned expression, his skin pale and his body still wrapped in funeral cloths. Around him, the witnesses bow, step back or kneel, surprised by the miracle. The light source seems to emanate from Christ and from Lazarus himself, establishing a visual dialogue between divinity and restored life. Chiaroscuro takes on a leading role here, marking the contrast between death and hope, terror and faith. Rembrandt shows his ability to orchestrate human reactions with a powerful psychological realism. Some of the spectators cover their faces, others raise their hands in disbelief. The raising of Lazarus is a high point in Rembrandt's early career, demonstrating his aptitude for biblical narrative and his ability to extract human and spiritual drama from it. The work suggests that the miracle affects not only the resurrected man, but also the conscience of those who witness the event, and by extension, those who view the painting centuries later. Number 27. Susanna and the Elders, 1647. In Susanna and the Elders, painted in 1647, Rembrandt addresses a popular theme from the Old Testament, the story of the chaste Susanna, harassed by two lascivious old men while bathing in a garden. Far from the conventional sensuality with which the scene was often represented, the Dutch painter opts for a more human and psychological interpretation. Susanna appears surprised, vulnerable, trying to cover her nakedness with a desperate gesture, while the old men stalk her among the vegetation. The directed lighting highlights Susanna's body and the alarmed expression on her face, contrasting with the shadows where the old men are hidden. This light-shadow dichotomy underlines the moral drama of the passage: exposed innocence versus secret desire and coercion. Rembrandt's loose brushwork, rich in nuances and textures, gives the work a vivid, almost tactile realism. The scene, more than a mere pretext for nudity, becomes a study of harassment, injustice, and threatened female dignity. With the same empathy with which he approaches other themes, Rembrandt does not judge, but presents emotions on the surface. The viewer's discomfort with the situation reinforces the universality of the message. This is not just a biblical story, but a tale of humanity and the need to defend integrity against the abuse of power. Number 26. Jacob's Dream, 1639. Jacob's Dream represents the biblical episode in which Jacob, during a journey, falls asleep and dreams of a ladder that connects the earth with heaven, where angels ascend and descend. Painted around 1639, Rembrandt's work suggests the moment of intimacy between the physical and spiritual world. Jacob, lying on a stone, lies submerged in a deep sleep, while a dim light envelops the scene. Far from showing visible angels or a clearly outlined ladder, Rembrandt hints at supernatural elements through light atmospheres and subtle plays of shadow. This dreamlike approach concentrates attention on the sleeping figure and the inner experience of the character. The pictorial technique, increasingly loose and impasto, allows the artist to create soft transitions of color and light, as if the scene were taking place on the border between the conscious and the unconscious. Jacob's Dream is not just a biblical illustration, but a meditation on the contact between the human and the divine, the fragility of man in the face of forces greater than himself. The painting suggests that spiritual revelations are not always ostentatious, often presenting themselves as a silent whisper in the stillness of the night, a meeting between doubt and hope that beats in the human heart. Number 25. Self-Portrait at the Age of 34, 1640. The Self-Portrait at the Age of 34, dated 1640, is one of the most famous of Rembrandt's extensive series of self-portraits. In this canvas, the painter is depicted in the prime of his career, dressed in rich and elegant attire, recalling the stately pose of Renaissance portraits, such as those by Raphael or Titian. However, the superficial grandiloquence contrasts with the artist's introspective and slightly melancholic gaze. The well-controlled chiaroscuro serves to accurately model the features and reveal the psychological atmosphere. The slightly tilted head, the marked brow, and the compressed mouth suggest a complex and thoughtful personality. This self-portrait has been interpreted as Rembrandt's attempt to place himself in the tradition of the great masters of the past, while asserting his own style and uniqueness. In this work, the brushwork is more precise than in his later works, and the fabrics, jewelry, and ornaments are rendered in minute detail. However, the real focus remains on the facial expression. The self-portrait at the age of 34 inches combines the visual authority of the established artist with an awareness of time and mortality, anticipating the brutal honesty of his later portraits, where the mask of social pomp vanishes and the human being emerges in his naked truth. Number 24. The Conspiracy of Claudius Civilis, 1661 to 1662. The Conspiracy of Claudius Civilis is a unique work in Rembrandt's late production. Painted around 1661 to 1662, it was commissioned to decorate Amsterdam's town hall, but its reception was cold, leading the painter to withdraw it and cut the canvas. The episode depicted comes from Tacitus's Gallic Wars, where the Batavian leader, Claudius Civilis, conspires against the Roman Empire. The scene shows Civilis, one-eyed and with rough features, presiding over a pact sealed with oaths and raised swords. Far from the heroic idealism expected in an official painting, Rembrandt creates a dark, almost wild atmosphere, illuminated by an uncertain light, like that of a torch. The asymmetrical composition and the loose, dense brushstrokes accentuate the wild, primitive, and anti-heroic character of the scene. This work can be interpreted as an act of artistic rebellion. Instead of pandering to the bourgeois taste for decorum and clarity, Rembrandt delved into ambiguity, moral gloom, and human ferocity. The rejection of his contemporary public confirmed that Rembrandt was going against the grain of the conventions of his time. Today, the Conspiracy of Claudius Civilis is seen as an example of the painter's nonconformist genius in his later years, when he no longer sought social favor but to express his own vision of the world. Number 23. The Artist in His Studio, 1629. The Artist in His Studio, from 1629, is an early gem in which Rembrandt shows a small and modest workshop with a young painter at an easel. It has been interpreted that the artist portrayed is Rembrandt himself, reflecting on his work, his tools, and the still blank canvas. This work is far from the portrait of a studio full of luxury or large dimensions. On the contrary, it suggests the solitude, concentration, and humility of artistic work. The light penetrates sparsely and slantedly, highlighting the rough surfaces of the environment, the wooden floors, the sober walls, the blank canvas waiting to be transformed. The figure of the young painter, tiny in relation to the space, symbolizes the silent struggle to give shape to ideas, the intricate relationship between the creator, his craft, and the raw material with which he works. The Artist in His Studio can be read as an existential reflection on the act of creating. The empty canvas represents infinite potential, insecurity, and hope. The painter, a vulnerable being before his task, silently meditates on how to shape his vision in a world full of limitations. This introspective view of the studio contrasts with the idealized image of the brilliant artist that would emerge in later centuries, presenting the young Rembrandt as a hard worker, endowed with sensitivity and perseverance. Number 22. The Denial of Peter, 1660. The Denial of Peter, painted around 1660, addresses one of the most human and painful episodes of the New Testament, the moment when the Apostle Peter, out of fear, denies knowing Christ. The scene shows Peter surrounded by servants and guards in the courtyard of the high priest, while a woman points at him, accusing him of being a follower of the prisoner. Peter, with a frown and anxious look, gestures in denial of any connection, while a rooster, a symbol of coming repentance, appears in the shadows. Light is masterfully used to outline psychological tensions. Peter's face is in the shadows, in contrast to the reflections of the guards' weapons and armor. The impasto brushwork, typical of Rembrandt's late period, adds density to the atmosphere, creating an almost tactile environment. There are no grand heroic gestures, but the simple humanity of fear and betrayal, the guilt brewing inside the disciple. The Denial of Peter is a study of human fragility in the face of pressure and danger. Rembrandt, faithful to his empathetic vision, does not condemn Peter, but shows him as a terrified man, participating in a universal moral drama. This work engages with the contemporary viewer, reminding them that the weaknesses and tensions of the human soul do not belong only to sacred history, but are still alive in each of us. Number 21. Jacob blessing the sons of Joseph. 1656. In Jacob blessing the sons of Joseph, 1656, Rembrandt interprets the biblical episode in which the patriarch Jacob, old and blind, bestows his blessing on Ephraim and Manasseh, sons of his son Joseph. This family and spiritual scene is depicted with an almost domestic proximity. Jacob, weak and seated, places his hands carefully on the children's heads, while Joseph and Asenath look on with reverence and a certain nostalgia, aware of the importance of the moment. The dim light focuses on the faces, hands, and soft cloths of the clothing, creating an intimate atmosphere, as if the viewer were contemplating a private scene through a half-open door. The brushwork is loose, with visible impasto and rich textures, reflecting Rembrandt's mature style. This free workmanship does not diminish the force of expression, but rather enhances it, capturing the vulnerability of old age and the innocence of childhood. Rembrandt's choice of this subject suggests his preference for stories that combine the human and the sacred, avoiding spectacle and concentrating on the emotional core. Jacob blessing Joseph's sons conveys a discreet and profound spirituality, supported by family love, generational legacy, and the continuity of faith. It is a painting that contemplates the finitude of life, the handover between generations, and the comfort of knowing that blessing and hope are transmitted through the invisible ties of blood, faith, and human history. Number 20. Jeremiah lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem. 1630. Painted around 1630, Jeremiah lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem is considered one of Rembrandt's early masterpieces. Inspired by the Old Testament, the scene presents the prophet Jeremiah in grief, reflecting on the fall of the holy city at the hands of the Babylonians. Still a young man, Rembrandt employs his budding mastery of chiaroscuro to create a dramatic focus. The prophet's face, illuminated with dim light, stands out against the gloom that envelops the rest of the composition. Jeremiah appears pensive, sitting near the ruins, with his head resting on his hand. His expression conveys moral pain and helplessness in the face of devastation, evoking human fragility in the face of historical misfortune. At his feet, a collapsed temple suggests the irreversibility of tragedy. Unlike other, more theatrical Baroque painters, Rembrandt opts for an intimate and psychological interpretation, focusing on the character's mood. The tactile quality of the fabrics, the differentiation of textures, and the chromatic subtlety announce the artist's future maturity. The emotional realism that permeates Jeremiah not only narrates a biblical episode, but also alludes to human nature, its grief in the face of loss, and the perseverance of faith despite adversity. This painting establishes the basis of Rembrandt's interest in the spiritual and psychological dimension, which will characterize his entire career. Number 19. The Rape of Ganymede. 1635. The Rape of Ganymede, 1635, is one of Rembrandt's most curious works on mythological themes. The painting tells the Greek myth in which Zeus, metamorphosed into an eagle, kidnaps the young Ganymede to take him to Olympus. However, far from the idealized and sensual representation that other Renaissance and Baroque artists gave to this episode, Rembrandt offers a humorous and earthly version. In his canvas, Ganymede is not a beautiful, perfect Ephebe, but a chubby, frightened child who cries and urinates in panic while being lifted up by the eagle. This demystified vision disconcerts those who expect a heroic image of the myth. The clear, direct light illuminates the child, bringing out every fold of his clothing and his tender features deformed by crying, while the background remains darker, isolating the action in an almost theatrical space. With this work, Rembrandt not only breaks with idealized conventions, but also demonstrates his interest in real humanity, with its weaknesses and fears, even in the context of a sacred or legendary tale. The Rape of Ganymede is a testament to the painter's wit and audacity, who dared to reinterpret classical sources with empathy and a deeply human sense of humor. Number 18. The Skinned Ox, 1655. The Skinned Ox, circa 1655, is considered one of the most intense and symbolic paintings of Rembrandt's mature period. The canvas presents the body of an ox hanging, already skinned, inside what appears to be a modest shed. The scene, crude and almost unpleasant at first sight, is a masterful study of color, texture, and light, where flesh, entrails, and wood acquire an exceptional pictorial weight. Although it can be interpreted simply as a still life or a technical exercise, the work has given rise to deeper readings. Some see in it a reflection on the fleeting nature of life and mortality, a memento mori that refers to the fragility of the human being. The light, which illuminates the carcass with implacable clarity, creates contrasts that highlight the volume and immediacy of the animal. The brushstrokes, loose and impasto, give an almost tactile quality to the pictorial surface. For contemporary sensibilities, The Skinned Ox is a masterpiece of artistic sincerity. Far from embellishing reality, Rembrandt exposes it without any cover-ups. This painting exerted a notable influence on modern artists such as Chaim Soutine, and remains a distinguished example of the expressive power achieved when the painter confronts the crudeness of existence without veils or distractions. Number 17. Self-Portrait with Cap and Two Chains, 1642. Self-Portrait with Cap and Two Chains, 1642, is one of the many portraits in which Rembrandt confronted himself on the canvas. Here he is shown wearing a dark cap and wearing two gold chains, an outfit that could allude to his relatively comfortable social situation in those years or to his ascendancy in the Amsterdam art market. The soft light illuminates his face from an angle that highlights the features and the texture of the skin, revealing a serious and thoughtful expression. The gaze is slightly directed towards the viewer, conveying a subtle sense of introspection, as if the artist, in the midst of a professional ascent, were evaluating his position in the world. This self-portrait combines a certain aura of external nobility, suggested by the chains, perhaps a symbol of prestige or distinction, with the psychological honesty that characterizes the genre in Rembrandt's work. The brushwork is finer than in his later period and the composition is balanced, reflecting the moment when the painter was at the height of his fame, before the vicissitudes that would mark his maturity. Number 16. Portrait of Saskia van Eilenberg, 1633. In the Portrait of Saskia van Eilenberg, dated 1633, Rembrandt immortalizes his young wife, whom he had married the previous year. Saskia belonged to a wealthy family, which contributed to the artist's financial and social stability at that time. The work shows the young woman dressed in elegant attire, jewelry, and a delicate headdress, radiating the splendor of prosperity and newly found marital happiness. The light falls delicately on Saskia's face, highlighting her fair complexion and soft features. The folds of her clothes, the textures of the fabric, and the pearls are painted with meticulousness, showing Rembrandt's technical expertise in his years of consolidation. Beyond refinement, Saskia's gaze expresses closeness, sweetness, and a complicity that transcends the canvas. This portrait is a document of the painter's most luminous period, a time of relative abundance, affection, and harmony. Over the centuries, the work has become one of the most vivid testimonies of Rembrandt's personal life, a reflection of Saskia's presence and influence in his work and in his heart. Number 15. The Supper at Emmaus. 1648. Rembrandt addressed the theme of the Supper at Emmaus on several occasions, and the 1648 version is one of the most suggestive. The scene represents the moment when, after Christ's resurrection, two disciples recognize him as he breaks bread during dinner. Instead of an ostentatious miracle, the artist opts for subtlety. Christ reveals himself through his gesture, his serenity, and the astonished reaction of the disciples. The composition is intimate, confined to a small space. The light, soft and evocative, emerges from Christ himself, bathing the faces with a soft and spiritual luminosity. The facial expressions are perfectly orchestrated. One of the disciples bows in reverence, the other steps back in awe. Christ's gesture is serene and full of empathy. Rembrandt's brushstrokes are refined and detailed, and his chiaroscuro masterful. This representation is not limited to narrating an evangelical passage, but rather conveys the inner experience of faith, the surprise at the sacredness that is shown in the simplicity of an everyday act. Thus, the Supper at Emmaus becomes a metaphor for spiritual recognition, a reminder of the silent and transforming power of the divine presence. Number 14. The Philosopher in Meditation. 1632. The Philosopher in Meditation, 1632, is one of Rembrandt's most emblematic images, often interpreted as an evocation of inner silence and the search for knowledge. The scene shows an old man sitting near a window, deep in thought, while the morning light passes through the window and merges with the darkness of the interior. Next to him, a spiral staircase suggests the progressive ascent towards wisdom or transcendence. The chromatic palette is soft, dominated by browns, ochres, and golds, transmitting warmth and an atmosphere of contemplation. The composition, organized around light contrasts, harmoniously balances the serenity of the philosopher with the symbolic complexity of his surroundings. This painting transcends the portrait or the costumbrista scene and enters the realm of allegory. The wise thinker, the light that illuminates the space and the staircase as a symbol of inner progress. The Philosopher in Meditation suggests that, for Rembrandt, wisdom was not an external spectacle, but an inner, silent journey, marked by contemplation and the slow ascent towards a deeper understanding of the world and oneself. Number 13. Portrait of Jan 6. 1654. The Portrait of Jan 6, 1654, is one of the most admired examples of Rembrandt's genius in the field of portraiture. Jan 6, poet, art collector, and ruler of Amsterdam, was a cultured and refined man, a personal friend of the painter. Rembrandt managed to capture his essence with a simplicity and elegance that starts with a loose, almost sketchy brushstroke, especially on the sleeves and the cape, contrasting with the meticulousness of the face. The figure is placed in a discreet interior, without excessive ornamentation. Jan 6 is represented in a casual moment, as if he had stopped in the middle of an everyday action. The detail of the glove being put on or taken off, the relaxed pose, and the intelligent gaze convey intimacy and closeness, moving away from the usual rigidity of formal portraits of the period. This portrait embodies Rembrandt's mastery in fusing psychological realism with spontaneity, an achievement that few painters have equaled. With his loose technique and empathy towards the sitter, The artist reveals the personality and character of Jan 6, leaving an immortal testimony to the friendship, mutual respect and humanism that reigned in the intellectual circles of Golden Age Amsterdam. Number 12. The Man with the Golden Helmet, 1630. The Man with the Golden Helmet, circa 1630, is a portrait historically attributed to Rembrandt, although it is now considered likely to have come from his circle or a close disciple. Even so, the work is an extraordinary example of the style and atmosphere that characterize the master's creative environment. The figure, an anonymous man in armor and an ornate helmet, emerges from the darkness thanks to an intense chiaroscuro. The golden light, which mainly illuminates the helmet and part of the face, creates a dramatic focus that contrasts with the shadows in the background. This representation does not seek heroic idealization, but rather a certain lyricism in the character's introspection. The man seems absorbed in his thoughts, perhaps reflecting the symbolic weight of the armor as a moral burden or responsibility. Although the authorship is not certain, The Man with the Golden Helmet continues to fascinate critics and spectators for its enigmatic atmosphere, the pictorial workmanship of indisputable quality and the ability to transmit the human character behind the martial attire. The spiritual and artistic seal of the Rembrandt universe is captured in this canvas. Number 11. The Feast of Balthazar, 1635. The Feast of Balthazar, 1635, also known as Belshazzar's Feast, is one of Rembrandt's most notable historical and biblical compositions. The painting illustrates the passage from the Book of Daniel in which King Balthazar celebrates an ostentatious banquet with the sacred vessels of the Temple of Jerusalem, until a supernatural hand writes incomprehensible words on the wall that predict his downfall. Rembrandt turns this moment into a dramatic crescendo. Balthazar, adorned with luxurious clothing and jewels, is startled by the sight of the mysterious inscription. His guests, frozen in expressions of fear and bewilderment, drop their cups. The light, concentrated on the central figures and the writing on the wall, emphasizes the miraculous and prophetic character of the event, while the rest of the room remains in shadow. The atmosphere is charged with psychological tension. The brushwork, still relatively detailed, reveals the textures of the fabrics and metals, accentuating the contrast between the ephemeral glory of human power and the inescapable weight of divine destiny. Balthazar's Feast is one of Rembrandt's great biblical scenes, where action is combined with moral introspection, reminding the viewer that arrogance and impiety have a limit that cannot be ignored. Number 10. The Blinding of Samson, 1636. The Blinding of Samson is one of Rembrandt's most dramatic and heartbreaking paintings, made in 1636, during one of the most creative and productive periods of his career. Based on the biblical story from the Book of Judges, the scene represents the moment when Samson, the famous Hebrew hero endowed with enormous strength, is betrayed by Delilah and captured by the Philistines. Deprived of his hair, the source of his power, Samson is reduced to helplessness and blinded by his enemies. The composition is dynamic and violent. Rembrandt places Samson at the center of the action, lying on the ground, screaming and writhing in pain as a Philistine stabs him in the eye with a dagger. The figures of the captors swirl around, and their brutality contrasts with the figure of Delilah, who walks away to the left with Samson's hair in her hand, a symbol of the betrayal accomplished. The chiaroscuro and the impasto brushstrokes underline the tension, creating strong light contrasts that emphasize the horror of the moment. The light, which falls on Samson's tense muscles and on the steely blade of the weapon, enhances the pathos of the scene and the tragic dimension of the story. On a symbolic level, This painting goes beyond the biblical narrative. Rembrandt captures human vulnerability in the face of betrayal, the fragility of power when its foundation is lost, and the rawness of unleashed violence. The degree of realism, visible in the expressions of panic and pain, in the sweat that shines on the skin, and in the savage gestures of the aggressors, makes this scene one of the most striking in his work. The blinding of Samson not only documents an ancient story, but connects with the contemporary viewer by exploring the extreme limit between strength and weakness, confidence and ruin. Number 9. Danae, 1636. Danae, painted around 1636, is one of Rembrandt's most sensual and monumental works. Inspired by Greek mythology, it tells the myth of Danae, the princess who was imprisoned by her father, King Acrisius, to prevent her from conceiving a child who, according to the oracle, would kill him. However, Zeus, transformed into a shower of gold, fertilized her, giving birth to Perseus. Rembrandt opts for an intimate moment before the divine eruption, presenting Danae half-naked, reclining on a wide bed with soft and shiny sheets. Unlike other painters who represented Danae as an erotically idealized figure, Rembrandt shows her with warm realism, humanizing the figure. Her skin, illuminated by a warm, golden light, reveals pink hues and a corporeal texture. Danae's gaze seems to be directed toward an invisible point, perhaps toward the divine presence that is sensed in the environment. The rich coloring, the exquisite handling of the fabrics and the fusion of light and shadow make the space pulsate with an intimate and expectant atmosphere. The work was altered after Rembrandt's death and was later damaged by a vandal attack in the 20th century. However, restorations have allowed it to be admired in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. Danae is a hymn to earthly beauty, to vulnerable and dignified femininity, and to the subtlety of myth understood not only as a fantastic tale, but as a profound human experience, full of mystery and promise. Number 8. The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, 1633. The Storm on the Sea of Galilee is Rembrandt's only known seascape, painted in 1633, and depicts the miracle narrated in the New Testament, when Christ calms the raging waters in the face of the panic of his disciples. This oil on canvas, stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston in 1990 and still missing, is a testament to the painter's narrative wit, capturing the immediacy of danger and human anguish in the face of the indomitable forces of nature. The composition is articulated around a ship tossed by enormous waves, illuminated by a dramatic light that alternates between light and dark. The disciples struggle with the ropes, sails, and rudder, displaying expressions of fear and bewilderment. In contrast, Christ remains serene, seated in the stern, radiating a calm that seems to confront the fury of the elements. The brushwork is detailed in the description of the wood, the soaked clothes, and the sea foam, while the treatment of light and shadow creates a tense and vibrant atmosphere. This painting symbolizes the relationship between man and the transcendent in the midst of chaos, and sums up Rembrandt's ability to provide spirituality and verisimilitude to biblical scenes. The Storm on the Sea of Galilee is not only an epic representation of a miracle, but an intimate approach to human vulnerability in the face of unknown forces and to faith as an anchor in the tempest of life. Number 7. The Syndics of the Drapers Guild, 1662. The Syndics of the Drapers Guild, 1662, also known as the Drapers' Meeting, is one of Rembrandt's most famous group portraits and one of the pinnacles of Dutch Golden Age painting. Commissioned by the Amsterdam Drapers Guild, the work shows 5 syndics and a clerk staring intently at the viewer, as if they had just been interrupted in the middle of an important discussion or audit of accounts. The composition is balanced and restrained. Each character retains his or her individuality, evidenced by facial features, age, expression, and body position. At the same time, the ensemble reflects the group's cohesion, authority, and sense of civic responsibility. Clear lighting, the use of warm, earthy colors, and meticulous brushwork convey the realistic atmosphere of a corporate meeting. This corporate portrait encapsulates the work ethic, guild organization, and bourgeois prosperity of 17th century Amsterdam. Rembrandt's genius lies in endowing an apparently prosaic scene with an intense psychological presence, making each syndic seem like a living, thinking individual and an essential part of the city's economic and social fabric. Number 6. Bathsheba with David's Letter, 1654. Bathsheba with David's Letter, 1654, is one of the painter's most iconic representations of a biblical theme that addresses desire, power, and destiny. The scene shows a freshly bathed Bathsheba, attended to by a maid, holding in her hand the letter in which King David orders her to appear before him. The woman's gaze, serene but full of thought, suggests awareness of the decision she must make. Yielding to the king's will mean betraying her husband Uriah, but rejecting him means risking her life. The figure of Bathsheba is realistically naked, far from idealized beauty. Her skin is warm, human, with folds and curves, and her expression mixes resignation, curiosity, intrigue, and sadness. The golden light highlights the texture of the flesh, the shine of the jewels, and the smoothness of the towel. Rembrandt goes beyond conventional eroticism, focusing on the moral drama and humanity of the character, using the biblical story to reflect on free will and the consequences of male power. The intimate and domestic atmosphere, the rich and vibrant brushstrokes, and the psychological depth make this painting a milestone in the representation of the female body in Baroque art. Bathsheba, far from being just a beauty to behold, is a human being facing a vital dilemma, and in that humanity lies the emotional strength of the work. Number 5. The Jewish Bride, 1665. The Jewish Bride, circa 1665, is the traditional name for a double portrait depicting a couple whose exact identity remains a matter of debate. Some believe that it could be Isaac and Rebecca, biblical figures, or a couple contemporary to Rembrandt who wanted to be represented with a symbolic aura. What stands out is the tenderness, complicity, and silent affection that can be perceived between the two characters. The man places his hand on the woman's chest in a protective gesture, while she responds with a shy gesture, somewhere between modesty and affection. The brushstrokes are loose and pasty, especially on the clothing, creating a luxurious texture and tonal richness that reflects the artist's technical maturity. The soft lighting caresses the faces and intertwined hands, underlining the emotional meaning of the scene. The Jewish Bride has been interpreted as a poem of conjugal love, a tribute to intimacy and human harmony. In contrast to the biblical or historical scenes of his youth, in this late period, Rembrandt prefers the simplicity of a personal emotional bond, showing that the greatness of art also resides in the stillness of a shared moment between two beings who love each other. Number 4. Self-portrait with two circles, 1665 to 1669. In Self-portrait with two circles, 1665 to 1669, Rembrandt shows himself in one of his last self-portraits, already old, with his face furrowed by the wrinkles of experience and his gaze firm, serene, and reflective. Behind him appear two semicircles or imperfect arches painted on the wall, whose meaning has been the subject of multiple interpretations. For some, They represent the perfection of the art that the painter tries to emulate. For others, they are an enigma, a technical or symbolic wink. The brushstrokes are dense and gestural, with thick impastos that almost sculpt the pictorial material. The light illuminates the face and the hands with which he holds the brushes and palette, emphasizing the physical presence of the artist in his studio. His clothing is simple, without ostentation, reflecting the austerity of his last years, marked by economic difficulties and the loss of loved ones. This self-portrait is a spiritual testament, a statement about the identity of the artist and his craft. A man who, after decades of creation, presents himself before the canvas with all his honesty, without idealization, assuming old age and mortality. The two circles could be the symbol of his genius and his ambition, or the unfathomable mystery of the art that has consumed his life. Whatever the interpretation, this work is a milestone in the history of psychological portraiture, an intimate dialogue between the painter, the painting, and the observer. Number 3. The Return of the Prodigal Son, 1669. The Return of the Prodigal Son, 1669, is possibly Rembrandt's last great work, painted shortly before his death. Inspired by the Gospel parable, the scene shows the culminating moment. The son who, after squandering his inheritance and falling into poverty, repentantly returns to his father's home. The father, with a serene face and protective hands, receives him with mercy and understanding. To one side, the older brother observes with a mixture of skepticism, jealousy, and bewilderment. The light focuses on the act of embracing, creating a warm, golden spotlight that illuminates the hands resting on the young man's back and his head bowed in a gesture of humiliation. The brushstroke is pasty, free, eliminating superfluous details to concentrate on the emotional essence of the moment. The atmosphere is silent, contained, almost sacred. This work is a philosophical and spiritual statement, a masterful study of human compassion, forgiveness, and redemption. There is no grandiloquence or spectacle. Greatness lies in empathy with the suffering and reconciliation between father and son. With The Return of the Prodigal Son, Rembrandt leaves behind a universal message of tenderness and humanity, a hymn to the dignity of the human being that transcends time and cultural boundaries. Number 2. The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicolai's Tulp, 1632. The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicolai's Tulp, 1632, was the work that catapulted Rembrandt to fame in Amsterdam. The painting depicts a public anatomy class, in which Dr. Tulp demonstrates the muscles of a cadaver's arm to a group of surgeons. Rembrandt organizes the composition around the illuminated cadaver, creating a strong contrast with the dark background. The faces of the doctors reflect interest, scientific curiosity, and the solemnity of the moment. The meticulous anatomical representation of the deceased's arm and hand, the mastery of chiaroscuro, and the careful arrangement of the figures give the scene an aura of professionalism and prestige. At the same time, the painting transcends the documentary function. The individual expressions of the surgeons and the irrefutable presence of death provoke a reflection on human fragility, the role of science, and the search for knowledge as an antidote to ignorance and fear. This work marked a turning point in the young Rembrandt's career, consolidating his reputation and opening the doors to prestigious commissions. The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicolai's Tulp remains an emblematic image of the exchange between art, science, and humanity, a testament to how the artist knew how to combine realism and deep meaning in a single canvas. Number 1. The Night Watch, 1642. The Night Watch, 1642, whose original title is The Company of Captain Franz Banning Kock, is Rembrandt's most celebrated work and one of the iconic paintings of Western art. This monumental group composition, commissioned by the civic militia of Amsterdam, presents a company of city guards taking to the streets under the direction of Captain Banning Kock and his lieutenant Willem van Ruytenberg. What makes The Night Watch extraordinary is the dynamization of the collective portrait. Rather than showing the arquebusiers in a static row, Rembrandt arranges them in action, creating an almost theatrical scene full of movement, crossed gestures and intersecting glances. A golden light falls diagonally, highlighting some figures and leaving others in semi-darkness, generating a dramatic effect. The light contrast, the use of color and the complex composition form a visual framework that leads the eye across the canvas. In addition, the presence of a mysterious girl with a chicken hanging from her belt and certain symbolic details add layers of interpretation. The work reflects the civic pride, prosperity, and social cohesion of Golden Age Amsterdam, but at the same time breaks with rigid formalism, giving way to a dynamic and psychologically rich narrative. The Night Watch, exhibited at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, is a witness to Rembrandt's genius at the maturity of his career. It is his most popular work and symbolizes his ability to transform a bourgeois commission into a poetic, profound, and timeless vision. Through this canvas, Rembrandt not only immortalized a company of armed citizens, but also marked a milestone in the history of art, inspiring future generations with his compositional, luminous, and emotional mastery. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Give it a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with your friends and family.